Today, we're going to talk about voting and everything that everyone needs to know. So, we're going to break down the three branches. I will be covering the judicial branch. Gert, you will be covering
the executive branch, and then Gina will be covering the legislative branch.
Exactly. So, we're going to switch out Gert's and Gina, her twin. So, I'm going to get us started with the judicial branch. So, this branch to me was the most bizarre. It's definitely something I never had emphasis on. And it's so bizarre because we do not vote on who is in the judicial branch. And that is our Supreme Court. Like our Supreme Justices. That's who those people are. And those people decide what is constitutional and what is not. So when you think about what is constitutional and what is not, you should think about things like Brown versus Board. These are the people who are making really important decisions that really can't be overturned by someone else other than them. So they hold a lot of power. And not only that, but their terms are the longest. The only way to get out of being a Supreme Court justice is to be impeached. There was only one Supreme Court justice who was impeached, and it was unsuccessful. And that was in 1805. So these are people you want to pay attention to. Exactly. And so right now, our there's 9 justices overall. It's a majority conservative. So when we're thinking about passing legislation about DACA, which is something you guys will address later, and we're thinking about passing legislation about the killing of unarmed Black people, these are folks who ultimately hold a lot of power. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Gertz, to talk about your branch.
All right. So I'm trying to connect this to my Google Docs. I can look at some notes while I'm speaking. But I'm covering the executive branch today. And the executive branch consists of the president, currently Donald Trump, and also the vice president, currently Michael Pence, and also it consists of the cabinet, which includes the secretary. So this is the secretary of state. This is who secretary of housing. So there's like a secretary. This is appointed by the president, the commander in chief. President, of course, we all know serves 4 years, and unless the president is impeached, which also, like the Supreme Court justices, is very often. And we also have the vice president. So the president can serve up to 2 terms, 8 years total. And then sorry, my phone said low battery. So we're also the ones voting for, because we're voting for the president, we don't get to vote for the departments, for the people who are secretaries of the departments. So really, this is important for you to keep in mind who you are voting for president, because the president gets to choose who affects your housing. So who will affect, especially the secretary of housing, they get to tell us, how much money we are allocating for housing. Do we qualify for subsidized housing? How much funding goes into it to make all those decisions? There's also secretaries for anything else, such as education, secretary of education. How much money is funded into private schools? How much money is funded into public schools? How much money is funded into charter schools? So think about who really is affecting your public schools, your public housing, who's affecting your children's education, your children's lives as well, because that's what the president is choosing. So if you want to choose someone who's conservative, that's fine. Just make sure that you're choosing someone who's conservative. That will probably choose people who are conservative as well in the other sectors of the government, such as the, housing, and as well education. If you choose someone who's liberal, someone maybe left-wing, make sure you're considering that this person will probably be appointing somebody who's liberal and left-wing into those departments. You have no say into that. That is completely up to the president. It has nothing to do with you.
I love that you mentioned that there are certain positions that hold a lot of power that we have no say over. And by the time we want change to be made, it's almost like that voting season is over and you have to wait an additional 2 years.
Right.
That are urgent. And so one thing that I forgot to mention before is that the Senate is who confirms who's in the judicial system. So we vote for who is in the Senate, right? If you're not, it blew my mind when I found out about this. If you are not already thinking ahead, you're kind of already behind, because by the time we voted into the Senate and the Senate has confirmed who the president has suggested as a justice, it's almost too late. I looked online. Some of these people have been justices for 24 years. That's as old as me and you. And they still have a long career. Because again, they either retire, they die, and it's a possibility of being impeached, but it's almost an impossibility because it's never happened successfully. I'm sorry.
Right. And you also should know is that to be a Supreme Court judge, you don't actually have to be a real judge in like a local precinct. You don't have to actually be a state judge before that. You could have no judging experience. You could become a Supreme Court judge. And even with being, you don't even have to have a law degree. Like I got into law school, so I'll start law school in the fall. Somebody could have no law experience. Technically, you're not required to have any law experience at all. The person could have graduated in biology and they could become a Supreme Court judge, deciding on the biggest cases in the world, such as death penalty cases, the largest cases that have been appealed by state courts, by appellate courts, by local district courts, and they're choosing the biggest decisions, but they're not required to have the most expertise. So make sure you're thinking about who is representing you, because it could be somebody who might have the experience of somebody that you don't think should be be able to represent you. And I like what
go ahead.
93 saying interesting that UK could learn from the strategy too. That sounds super interesting to me. I don't know much about the UK's system as well as ours. I know they have like a parliament, but they also have like the royal system, but I'm interested in learning more about that as well.
Yeah, could you clarify, Nuri, what you mean by the UK could learn from this strategy too? And while you type that out, were you done, Gerds?
Yeah, I'm done. I don't know if it'd be easier for her to join or for her to type out.
I'm gonna switch it over to Gina.
Okay.
All right. So Nuri is gonna hopefully type out some more clarification, and I'm gonna get Gina on the line. And Gina, here she is. Okay. Thank you for coming. We love Haitian women. Nuri and Gina, hello.
So I'm going to be focusing on the legislative branch. The legislative branch consists of the Congress. And Congress, as we know, has two branches. It has the Senate and it has the House of Representatives. The Senate makes the laws, it declares the laws, but the judicial basically makes sure they are apprehended and make sure that the laws continue. So with the legislative branch, it's crazy how there's 435 representatives, and these 435 representatives, and for the House of Representatives, and the 100 senators, because each state gets 2 senators to equal out a total of 100 for our 50 states. They can serve any number of an indefinite amount of terms. The Senate terms are only 6 years, but the House of Representatives don't have an actual, they don't have a term, as the president has 4 years unless he can only serve 2 terms legally. The House of Representatives and the Senate can serve way more than 2 terms. It can serve an indefinite amount of terms. So with these things, we have to think of who we're putting in power, because these people are the ones that's making laws. These people are the ones that the legislative branch makes the laws. The legislative branch declares war, and the war, as we know, costs a lot of money. So we have to think about who we're putting in these positions. They have so much power where they're the ones basically controlling our. Even if you were just like, oh, that doesn't affect me. That's not true, because these laws cost money. Laws takes time, and declaring a war would literally make a country go into bankruptcy. The prison system and the war period prison system takes up so much of our money, so much of our tax money, where war makes us lose so much money. And if you don't win the war, you're screwed.
Yeah. Like economically, like how we're screwed now economically.
Exactly.
Thank you for joining. I saw John, I saw Ronnie, and Nuri has replied. She says, we have a House of Commons and House of Parliament. House of Parliament makes the decision on the law. Each area is split in two ways, where there are members of Parliament or MPs representing each area. That's really interesting. I'm gonna have to look that up later.
So would their House of Parliament, the one that makes a decision on the law, would that be their legislative branch, McKen?
Nuri, are you okay to clarify on, can I join you in the call? Let's see if she says yes or no. She said, Ronnie has a question. Could you explain the Electoral College if you already haven't? Does anyone feel equipped to answer that question? Can you explain?
I don't know a lot about it. I just
Yeah.
know about the Electoral College. Even though, yes, we do vote for our president. However, the Electoral College is the one that officially makes that president happen. So regardless of what we vote for, the Electoral College has the final say, unfortunately. So we also want to make sure we choose the right people in our Electoral College.
Mm-hmm. So, Ronnie, we haven't discussed Electoral College. We've discussed the three branches of our government and the issues we've had with them. And so I would love to do some research and message you personally about that when I feel like I have like a good answer to give you.
Yeah.
But I don't want to lie to anybody right
Me neither. I haven't really went into
now. I
deep
only want to
research
get
about
that. So let me write that down, or I'll forget. So the next thing that we wanted to discuss with you all was voting in upcoming elections. So this is something really interesting. While I was doing my research, we have besides the November election coming up about the president, Joe Biden and Trump, but we have in Alabama an election coming up because someone in the House actually got hired into the Trump administration, which I knew nothing about, and she's I can only say conservative because she's a Republican, but she was hired on the health committee, which is like also really bizarre. Like what happened to her before her? So we are holding that election. It's on August 4th. It's a Tuesday, and so like if you can vote during this election, do. I remember when Trump first came, like when you remember when Trump first announced he was running for president?
Yeah, I thought it was a joke.
Everyone thought it was a joke. And
then I was like, oh, just like when Kanye, I'm just like, oh, he's going to do another Kanye. You know, he's not serious. I was like, oh, shoot, this guy's serious.
It's like Oprah's running. But I was in West Virginia doing an internship at like this feminist camp, which was like really weird in itself. But we were meeting, we met someone in the government. And I remember she said to us, she said, if you guys aren't registered to vote as Republicans, I really want you guys to think about it. Donald Trump is running. And I think she knew more than what we knew because everyone was like laughing about it. And she was saying we need people to like vote another candidate besides Trump. And, like she was really concerned. She was like, really like if he runs, I think he's gonna win. And so that was like I don't know, it was just the most bizarre thing that I had ever heard like in my whole life. And I wish I had taken her seriously.
I wish I had taken her seriously, yeah.
Yeah, because like I know I had a friend who was in basic training, and when she came out, she was like, "This is a joke, right?" And I was like, "No, it's not. It's real life."
Okay, so Florida's a little bit different where we do not have any in-person absentee ballots. You're either there the day of the voting or you cannot vote. I know that a few years ago when I was in high school, there was this huge controversy going on in America about how a lot of the voting it's fraud. People, are not voting legally. Where it's like they were saying people would vote twice, and I think just Florida put an end to that where they're like, okay, you have to be in person to vote. And with Florida, you can vote early. Our voting is starting August 8th through 15th, early voting.
Oh.
The deadline, please keep in mind for our crazy Floridian, because I'm a crazy Floridian, that voting, the deadline to vote is, the deadline to register to vote is July 20th.
Wow,
yes, it's literally a month away. Like literally, because this year's going by so fast. It's a month and a few days away. So just keep in mind what it is that you want to see change in. Maybe you don't want to see change in the same issues that we want to see change in. Maybe these issues don't affect you. You may think these issues don't affect you. Just keep in mind what you want to see change in, and just think that it's not only the president. as Element Agape said, it's not only the president, because the president, yes, he is in a position of power, but that's why he has his team behind him, because these teams, they give him a certain amount of power. They limit his power. Without these teams, his votes cannot go through. And it's people are just putting blame on the president for all these a lot of this racial issues going on, and they had to keep in mind that yes, the president, in tribute of George Floyd, yes, the president did open, an FBI investigation to the murder of George Floyd. However, it's not the president who got Derek Chauvin and the other three murderers arrested, because that's not his state. The president is on a way different level where he may not be thinking about that. He may be thinking about that, but he's not going to think about every little thing that's going on. That's why we have mayors. That's why we have governors. That's why we can vote for mayors, governors. We can even vote for people we put in our kids' schools. If you don't like the way your kids are being treated, vote, vote, vote. If you don't, because there's even racial injustice in the school system, where
Yes.
there are videos where kids are literally getting beaten by cops in the school system. These kids are literally getting verbally abused due to the race. Like if you don't like these stuff, and it makes me so upset, because it's like race. I've never been in Naples, Florida. It's a very quiet town where we're all about appearance. We're a place where people come to retire. People are still protesting. That's why the protesting has expanded to the entire world. To 50 states. And people just need to keep in mind that with the voting, please just go vote, because voting in America, if you want to see change in anything in America, even with state taxes, just with anything that you don't like, you gotta vote. That's the only way. If there's power in the people, and that's why even though as blacks we don't, or as people who are colored, we don't feel that we're in a position of power. We don't feel that we're in a position where we see change. We don't feel that we don't feel that we're in a position to be protected. That's why we have the right to vote. And even though they can try so hard to take those rights away from us, with what Gertz was saying, how where immigrants, such as, because people who are on DACA, they're the immigrants. People who are on TPS, they're immigrants. Then that's a huge number of our American population. People who are DACA, TPS, people who are refugees, people who are illegal. And these people cannot vote. So we have to, if we don't like the way our friends are being treated, we have to be the ones that, even though we're not in position, we're not the president, even though we're not in a position where, we're not, for example, we're not the House representative, we're not one of the senators. However, we're in a position to change that. Social media has become such a big platform where we've seen that, where if it wasn't for the Black community, the people standing, the rest of social media standing with our people, that people have come to justice, and we're still waiting for justice for so many other people. However, we bring it into light. And for those of you who don't think that your voice matters, a quick example. Netflix was they put on a documentary that, did you hear about that?
Oh yeah, I didn't even watch it, but
I DM Netflix. So let me tell you guys the whole story. Netflix put on a documentary, the episode 101, it was, episode 9 of documentary 101, about the beginning of HIV and AIDS, and they were saying that HIV and AIDS began with Haitians, and that they put it as a theory. Why would you put a theory on a documentary? Documentaries are based on not biases, or not based on prejudices. Documentaries are based on facts. So if you don't have the facts to back that up, why are you putting that on the theory? Because Netflix is the biggest streaming platform in the world. So the millions and billions of people who are watching are literally thinking Haitians are the one who began this, who began HIV and AIDS. And the Haitian community got so upset. We were calling Netflix, emailing Netflix, DMing Netflix, and Netflix, they took it down 4 days ago. It's just things like that where people, I was speaking to my friend the other day, Rebecca Dubois. She was telling me how people in Ohio, they're like, there's a country called Haiti. And it's like, that's unacceptable, because Haiti, that's unacceptable. The Haitian Revolution is the one that ended slavery.
No.
Yeah, you know, that's unacceptable, especially for a Black person to say that. There's a country named Haiti, there's Haitians. It's like, you better know your history, you know, because we're all connected. So for someone to
We're
say
all
that,
part of the diaspora.
yes, there you go, the African diaspora, you know, and
my mind.
it's not only colors. We're like the indigenous people of Haiti were Taínos Indians, Taínos Native Americans, excuse me. You know, we're all people of color. We're all connected.
Right, we have Jamila on the line. Hello, Jamila. It's nice to see you again. She does all this fitness stuff. That's amazing. I'm gonna get Gertz on the line. Thank you again for everyone who's joined, and don't shy to ask questions. Nerese has filled us in some more. She said, "Oh, hey, Gertz." I'm gonna Nerese comment really quick.
Sounds
So
good.
words, areas in each city or counties, they have representatives. So each county has a representative. The elections are passed through locally once a year as to who gets in. That's awesome. They do it once a year, their elections?
She means wards, like district ward areas.
For her counties. But we don't even do it that often, do we? I don't think we do.
I think she's saying so wards in each city or counties that has representatives.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk about your elections coming up?
Yes, so I'm looking at some notes. So this is for Ohio's federal elections. This is the national elections. So registration deadline is October 5th. So make sure you keep that in mind. If you live in Ohio, this is where I'm living right now, so that you can make sure you're not applying last minute. Because even though elections are not till November, do not wait till November to apply. And we know that especially now, especially because a lot of candidates have not gotten. We haven't had a lot of campaigns be brought in the front and center because everything else has been going on. So we had COVID being in the news for such a long time. We've had a lot of the protests, a lot of the unjust killings being in the news. And it's important to be informed about those things, to make sure that even though the elections are not in the news, you're still being informed about them. Because you might not be reminded as often as you would be any other election year, because every other election year we didn't have COVID, or I guess we didn't have the intensity of these killings. So the registration deadline is, like I said, for Ohio, October 5th. And the general elections is not until November 3rd. That's the day that that's the day that the general elections are taking place. A lot of jobs will allow you to take off to vote. However, some jobs are not willing to pay you to take off to vote unless you do public work. So I think that the best way to get around that is make sure you save a personal day for the day of voting. Make sure that you, or even use a sick day for the day of voting, because it's really important that we do vote. And make sure you request that ahead of time, because during I know like what some jobs do, that's just my job, they have blackout days where you can't use them for personal days if they realize that a lot of people are going to be using those days for personal days later on. So if you want to do an absentee vote, such as like maybe you'll be out of town, like I'm constantly out of town, maybe you'll be out of town, or maybe you won't be able to be there. So what you'll do is you'll have to request an in-person absentee ballot for your state. And you can do voting for ballots October 3rd to November 2nd. So you have about a month to do that. You cannot do it before that month or after that month, because then it will not count. And the deadline to request that is October 31st. This is a Saturday, which is convenient because you don't have to worry about requesting while you're at work, and which means you have the whole work week to be able to request that. And this is at 12 p.m. Even though we're used to most deadlines like 11:59 p.m. before like midnight, this amount. If you try, it might not work for you. So make sure you're requesting before 12 p.m. and try to request as early as possible, because if so many people are requesting at the same time, like there might be a glitch in the system that might not be able to work. The deadline to request is, like I said, it's Saturday, October 31st, and then the deadline to return your completed absentee ballot, because complete absentee ballots are done. You're doing them on paper. This is the 3rd at 7:30 p.m. I'm somebody who had like this idea that, well, having people do absentee ballots on paper isn't necessarily fair, because it just keeps people from wanting to go the extra step from wanting to vote. It's where you have like very low voting populations, and having people go through one extra step of having to do paper voting and request it by mails and be harder. But I was talking to a former state senator about this for Kentucky. He told me that he just thought it was a lot better to have the paper ballots, because it makes sense, because then you have a paper trail, right? But you don't have as much rigged voting, with voting being done electronically, which voting be done at the poll stations. If you want to decrease the number of rigged votes, you can have a paper trail. You can't say, if we're like, for example, Trump did not buy a landslide, correct? Trump,
big facts, yeah.
right? It's like a small decrease, a slight change that could have made a huge difference, right? So if we had a paper trail with so many more paper votes, we could actually show like, well, this was rigged, this was not rigged, et cetera, right? And this could happen with any other president as well. There's a paper trail, then it's easier to decide to see if this is rigged, if this is not rigged, and it's harder to see that at the voting polls and at the voting stations because it's electronic, and things that are electronic could be easily changed and messed with and doctored, et cetera, and fake news, I guess.
Right.
And
I know there was a lot of
I'm sorry.
A lot of people were saying during this last election that some of the voting was rigged because of the machines.
Right. So even though the deadline to return it, the completed absentee ballot is November 3rd, which is the last day of voting for the general election voting, even through the voting stations. Just keep in mind that the deadline is 7:30 p.m. You cannot do your absentee ballot after that.
So they're accepting your absentee ballots until the day of?
Yes.
Wow. So in Alabama, you have to have it all submitted by, oh my gosh, 5 days before like the poll.
Which makes sense because if they're Alabama doing something really smart because then they have enough time to go through and read all the votes, right? But if in Ohio we're accepting them, the deadline to return them is November 3rd, then it's really hard to make sure we have read through all of the votes by the time when the president is announced.
Yeah.
So
and go ahead.
I was gonna say also keep that in mind that there might be a lot of unfair voting and a lot of votes that are not counted for because people naturally just cannot count that fast.
Right. And one thing that when you're filling out your absentee ballot, if that's something that you choose, while I was going through the process, you have to like print out an application, mail it, and then they mail you the ballot. So don't think you have another couple of weeks to do it. I would do it today.
Right.
And so one thing that we want to talk about is just some barriers to voting or some statistics. And I was originally going to talk about how Black women are politically active. But while I was doing research, I found out some cool information about voter suppression, specifically within the South. So in 2013, which would have been, I think, the time around when Obama was getting into his second term, there was a change to the Voting Rights Act, right, which is something that was a product of the civil rights movement. So what happened is that the Supreme Court decided to make provisions to the Voting Rights Act, specifically the portion that affected southern regions where voter suppression was intense, specifically with Black people, but also with Latinos or Latinx or whatever the community prefers to be called right now. But other minorities as well, but specifically African Americans were being suppressed. And one of the ways they were trying to prevent that is by preventing states from changing their voting laws without it being checked by someone else, right? So to keep them from changing the laws in a way that would make people's votes not be counted. But they took that away, saying that racial tensions were not the same anymore. But clearly we know that's not true because of present date. And so during that time, the Supreme Court justices were conservative, like the conservatives ruled them, and that's still a fact today. And what's his name? The name of the Chief Justice is John Roberts. And I got this article from the HuffPost. So that's where this source is coming from. But he was making suggestions that he desires to continue to make provisions on the Voters' Rights Act, which is to me ridiculous. Like you can't say that racial discrimination does not exist anymore. It just looks differently. And there were like a couple of liberals in the room. The most recent justice, who is Sonia, I don't want to butcher her last name, she was against it. And then also Ruth Bader, I don't want to butcher her last name either, she was against it as well. So those are some things I found interesting.
Okay, so I also wanted to speak a little bit about voting populations as well, and I think Gina still has to talk about the voting dates for Florida and also voting population. So I'm going to speak a bit on voting population as it comes to different communities. So like Tania said, the largest voting population among Black people are Black women, and the lowest voting population among Black people are, the largest is Black women, and the lowest are Black men, is what I meant to say. I'm not sure if I said that correctly. So keep in mind that that means that only so those who are voting, those who get their voices heard, right? So that means we're only hearing some voices, not hearing other voices. Not to say that all these voices are the same, but we need to be hearing a lot more voices than what we're currently hearing. And even though this is Black women that are voting, this is not all Black women that are able to vote, right? So people who are not able to vote, people who are convicted felons are not able to vote. And someone spoke about this a lot more clearly, and it was able to articulate this, I think, a lot better than I am, is the rapper Trick Daddy. He spoke about this in the show Love and Hip Hop. He spoke about how he's not able to vote because he's a convicted felon. I think that's really important for him to speak about, because it shows that how such a large part of our population is not able to vote. So it's up to those of us who are able to vote to make sure that we're making their voices heard, right? I think some of the best gifts you can give to your friend who cannot vote is to be a good friend and be a good ally by voting for them, right? Ask them, who do you think should be, why do you think this person should be in office? Because even though they're not voting, they're still keeping up with who should be chosen, correct? Because they know that this person is affecting them as much as they're affecting everyone else who can vote. Other groups that cannot vote are permanent legal residents cannot vote. So anyone has been a permanent legal resident for 5 years and has not yet, been able to reach the 5-year mark and pay the $800 and take the test for citizenship and pass the test cannot vote, or the 3-year mark if you're married to someone who's a citizen, they still can't vote. Anyone under a temporary protected status cannot vote. Anyone who's a refugee cannot vote. So anyone who basically is an immigrant who is not yet a United States citizen cannot vote. For example, I myself cannot vote. I'm a DACA recipient, which is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. So the way to be an ally to someone like me or someone in your community who cannot vote by own is asking them, like, who do you think should be able to vote? And something that affects me a lot is, like, whenever I'm with someone who says, oh, I don't bother voting, it's not a big deal for me to vote. I'm like, what do you mean you don't bother voting? It's not a big deal for you to vote. Well, it's a big deal. I wish I could vote. So if someone wants to be an ally to me, one of the best ways, I think, to be an ally to the immigrant community, to the Afro-Latino community, to the Latino community, to the Latinx community, is to vote, because some people in that community, like myself, cannot vote.
Right. And I think when people say, oh, hold the Black vote for this and that, it's like, I feel like certain communities want you to do that, because by the time you realize what a mistake it is, like every single one of us had a point where we said, these people are going to be in office for a long term. Like, the only person who really has a fixed term that we pay attention to is the president, but we need to direct some of that attention to these other branches of legislation that really are going to be here for the long haul, and we need to hold them accountable, because right now they're kind of like in the back, and they need to push.
President can only do so much. Sorry, president can only do so much, right? The judicial and the legislative are going to have to do the rest of the long haul. The president wants to pass so many things, but if it's not signed off by senators, it's not signed off by representatives, it's not signed off, then it doesn't make a difference.
Right. But for those of you, hey Carrington, thank you for coming back. Kewami Ray, did I say that right? I hope so. Hello. There she is. For those of you who are just joining in, we're just breaking down things you need to be vigilant about in your process.
Someone affects one of us, they're affecting all of us.
Exactly.
We have to keep that in mind with voting. We have to keep that in mind with racial prejudices. We have to keep that in mind with everything that we do, because people like my twin Gertz, who she's my identical twin sister, where I'm a legal immigrant, she's a DACA recipient, she cannot vote. So I have to keep in mind every single time something, I don't like the way America's treating her. I don't like the way America's, treating the DACA, the DACA population. I don't like the way America is deporting about 100 Haitians every week on Wednesdays. I don't like that, and I need to keep that in mind. I need to do this, if not for myself, because I am a legal citizen, and if not for myself, I need to do this for my children. I need to do this for my friends. I need to do this for my family.
Exactly. And there was something while you were talking, I was thinking that it's like we need to pay attention to what's happening.
Yes.
There's a lot of people promoting division. And yes, within the diaspora, we have our differences, just because we're on different parts of the world right now. But you might speak Creole, I might only speak English and a little bit of, Southern twang. Somebody else is speaking French. Somebody else is speaking Spanish. Somebody's speaking German. But we all have the same. So I don't think we need to be confused by that. So when someone in our community is being oppressed, then in a sense, all of us are being oppressed. And I think that's what we're seeing. And I like, just again, like, I cannot like express, like, we need to open our eyes and see what's going on with us, and we need to Google. Like, none of us, we're not girls just got accepted into law school. You're a nurse. I have like a bachelor's in psych. You don't need you don't need a law degree to Google information.
Exactly.
That like Supreme Court cases, it's free and available to you.
Literally.
Like, all you have to do is Google it, and it can be overwhelming sometimes. But just take one piece, start at one piece of something.
One piece at a time.
Mm-hmm.
It's if when you start you know trying to when you start you know what, I don't understand what's going on with the situation, before you act in the situation you research it, you know. So if you're confused about DACA, if you're confused about TPS, if you're confused about refugees, what they're doing, you know, deporting people, you know, to build a wall and secure, you know, just secure the American citizens. If you're confused about all of that, then go ahead and research it. Don't make, you know, don't just form an opinion. Go ahead and research it, because we are all connected. And when you do read about these things, like me researching these things, because I didn't know much about, I knew about DACA, but I didn't know much about how many people were on it. Vote against it. Vote for people who don't support the wall. You know, like, no, I don't want the wall because it's coming out of my paycheck. The government's not paying for that. We're going to be the ones paying for that.
Right. Do you have any other closing statements? I'm gonna switch over to Gerds to give it, because I see she's posting a lot about DACA, and I want to give her to speak on that.
Okay. Yeah, I see that Gerds wrote that Florida is not allowing absentee votes. Can keep people who are unable to work in the ability to vote. However, Florida is the one of the states that allows you to vote early. Yeah. So my closing statement would be, please vote early. For early voting, it is August 8th or August 15th. And you guys have to remember that the last day to register to vote is literally a month away, July 20th. Don't miss out on that deadline, guys.
Thank you so much. All right. And I also saw a comment on LinkedIn, and I'm not ignoring it. I saw what you said about sources, and I think that's so true. Like, even when you're watching these documentaries, you have to be aware that these people want to sell you a story and a narrative, and just pay attention to the angle that they're coming from too. So, Carrington, you're spot on about checking your sources.
I was saying, good point to Carrington for sure about checking her sources. Thanks for returning back to me. I just was gonna correct the statement that Gina made. DACA is a large population, but it is 8 not 8 million. It's 800,000. 8 million is a large. So we clarified that just in case somebody was confused. I also wanted to add a few more populations, groups of people in our countries of color, groups that are not able to vote. That is people who are political asylees, people who are also international students who are on F1 visas, and also people who are on work visas or not able to vote. So they're working in this country, even though everyone, the groups that I stated, the permanent resident aliens, the recipients, the international students on F1 visas, as well as the people on work visas, the political asylees, they are the refugees. If they're working, they're required to contribute tax money, but they're not able to vote, right? So they can give the country as much money as possible back and benefits, because they're not entitled to benefits, but they have the right to have benefits. However, they're not able to vote, and the vote still affects them, right? So they're not able to vote for who, but they're able to send the tax money to pay for the White House, correct?
Messed up.
Just keep that up voting. And also, June, that's not a big problem. I just wanted to clarify that.
It's fine. This is a learning experience for everyone, and this is also a safe space. Like, I'm pretty sure even a year from now, we're going to see this, say, oh, I could have did that differently.
And with Florida having such a really short early voting period, I think that people who are Floridians need to make sure they keep that in mind. Like Florida, so voting, general elections are not till November 3rd. However, Florida ends their voting, their early voting, the end of August, correct? So that means you have another wow, you could have voted for it over another month, right? So that means keep that in mind. So if you live in Florida, remember that you have to vote early, and there's so much a large chunk of time that you don't get to vote. I don't know if that large chunk of time is to get most people from, I don't know if it's intentional so most people cannot vote, or if it's just so they can make sure they get all of the voting, the counts at a timely and enough time. Well, not the end of August, thank you, August 15th, so they can make sure they can get enough, all the votes done in time. Unlike in Ohio, we have the absentee votes until the day of, so who can count it? I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the right answer is, right? Either way, it's lose-lose, but.
So if you are ever questioning anything about your voting, go to your state site. Literally, the website I was going to drop for you guys is nass.org/can I vote, or you can type in am I eligible to vote, and that should take you to the government website, where you can easily find whether you should be registering, what your status, where you're voting. Most places when you vote, they're not going to send you a letter in the mail saying this is your polling station. I remember I was voting in Kentucky while I was there for 2 years. Thank you for typing that. While I was there for 2 years. And I was like, I know I registered, but they haven't sent me anything in the mail. And someone told me that I should. I'm sorry, guys. I can't. It's about anyways. But anyways, what I was saying is that you should go and check your status. No one's going to tell you where to vote. If you don't know, ask someone in your community who's registered in the same area. That's what I did. I had asked someone in my community. I was like, where are you voting? She was like, oh, girl, don't worry about it. Just go down there. And I went down there. My name was in the book. So don't stress about it. Just get it done. Do you have any?
And rock the website where that's helpful for information to vote, especially for information for the individual states, right? If you need to know where do I vote and I live in Kentucky, go to Rock the Vote. And we also live in the digital age, right? We live in the digital era. So you can simply just go on Google, do a quick little, like, few minutes, few seconds search, and it'll give you the information that you need to register to vote, to know when your state is doing general, even local, and the state, as well as the national elections.
Okay.
Yes. Ronnie
said. What Ronnie's saying? Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Okay, so what Ronnie at Forever 31 is saying is make sure you bring your ID and know where you have to vote. Otherwise, they'll make you do the runaround. Yeah, so if you vote in the wrong place, they'll make you do the runaround and go to the right place to vote.
All right. Well, ladies, thank you so much. Thank you, Gina. Thank you, Gerds.
Thank you, Tania.
This was an awesome first Instagram Live. It's a learning experience. Thank you guys for being a part of it, and I hope that you guys can take something away from it. And Ronnie, I'll get back to you when I find the good answers.
And for those who missed it, those like someone who just logged in right now, thanks for everyone who logged in, who joined us. This will also be on the TheJeanTwins YouTube channel, so you guys can go back and watch it, and you guys can go back and ask questions that you guys forgot to ask today, or for questions that you think of later as you're rewatching, or something that you think, like we said, we wanted to answer Ronnie's question later about the Electoral College. We get back about that. Make sure you guys, yes, and also go in there and ask more questions and just review it if you guys need to send this to a friend.
Right. You can, you are so good about this. I'm like, okay, bye. And you're like, plug. Yeah, feel free to reach out to any of us. And also, like, with all the crazy things that were happening, our Element Agape podcast, I was not going to post any of our content pretending like all these crazy things were happening. That's just not a part of my nature. And so I do have a list of the order of things from now on. So everything is going to be cram-packed this month. So get ready, but don't get spoiled. We're going to have Ronnie. We're going to have Nari. We're going to have a Poet of the Week, surprising. We're going to have Gertson and Gina. And then we're going to have Rebecca Dixon this month. So I will put that out tomorrow. The list, the lineup, I'll probably put it up tonight, honestly. I think I'm going to do that. But thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you, Ronnie, for joining.
Yeah.
I know it's Kwame joined, Carrington, and a bunch of other people as well.
Yeah. And Destiny. Hey, Destiny girl, I see you. All right. Bye.
Bye.